On her knees. Now! The cold, razor-sharp command sliced through the humid air of the gas station. Officer Vance Maddox's voice was a low growl, the rumble of a predator. His Glock stayed firm. The black metal formed a stark contrast against the vibrant emerald silk of the woman's dress. Leora Hale, impeccable and majestic, she did not flinch, yet her warm, honey-colored eyes narrowed with a dangerous calm. A beauty like you in a car like this. You must be used to kneeling for a man, right? He said with contempt, his gaze fixed on the generous curve of her chest. But this time, you won't get a tip. You'll pay a fine. Hein had no idea that the woman he was terrorizing was the daughter of the state's attorney general. What happens when a corrupt police officer, drowning in gambling debts and swollen with a god complex, puts a gun to the head of the most protected daughter in the state? From what angle do you see this story? Like and subscribe to watch justice not only served, but delivered with the force of a tactical strike. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked asphalt of the city's forgotten east side, an oppressive, unrelenting heat that made the air shimmer above the pavement. This was the kingdom of Officer Vance Maddox, a realm of peeling paint, boarded-up storefronts, and the persistent scent of despair. At 38, he had begun to fray. The iron discipline of his academy days had softened into a pasty resentment that strained the buttons of his polyester shirt. His patrol car, a dented Crown Victoria that constantly smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant, was his throne. And from it he surveyed his domain with the jaded gaze of a king whose subjects had long since disappointed him. Today, the pressure was physical, a tightness in his chest, a notification still glowing on his disposable phone. It was a hard reminder. $1,000 by Friday, or we talk to your wife about your other hobbies, and then we break your legs. The message from his bookie was not a suggestion. It was a death sentence on installments. He needed a miracle. He needed a score. He needed a victim. And then he saw her. It was as if the sun itself had decided to illuminate that filthy corner. A Lamborghini Huracan painted a shade of acid green, so vibrant it hurt the eyes. Hummed into the dilapidated gas station across the street. The car was an alien vessel, a visitor from a universe of wealth and ease that Maddox could only dream of. It was an insult. He watched, knuckles white on the steering wheel, as the driver's door swung open. A single long leg appeared, shod in a strappy gold heel, followed by the rest of Leora Hale. The sun reflected off the fabric of her dress, a simple emerald silk tunic that clung to her curves like a second skin. She was a vision of impossible beauty. Her skin held the polished tone of mahogany. A cloud of dark, coiled curls framed a face of perfect symmetry. She moved with a natural, effortless grace, like a queen descending from her carriage. She was tall, sculptural, and the simple cut of the dress did nothing to hide the generous curve of her bust, a detail that immediately sparked a crude, possessive flicker in Maddox's mind. I did not see a woman. He saw a collection of offensive symbols. The car screamed drug money. The dress screamed high-end escort. Her beauty, her confidence, her very presence in that part of the city. It was a personal affront. His mind, a worn machine of prejudice and discrimination, began to work. In seconds, he constructed a narrative for her. She was some rapper's girlfriend, or the trophy of a drug dealer, overflowing with money that was not hers. Money she would not miss. Money that could solve his problems. The idea that she might simply have earned this life, that she could be a successful woman in her own right, was a possibility so foreign to his worldview that it never even registered. She was an anomaly, and anomalies in his kingdom had to be crushed or exploited. He felt a surge of adrenaline, the familiar thrill of the hunt. This was it. This was his miracle, delivered in a green supercar and wrapped in emerald silk. She was not a citizen to protect. She was prey. And Officer Vance Maddox, a predator backed by the power of his badge, was about to act. He started the patrol car. The engine roared to life with a dull growl that mirrored the one in his own chest. Leora settled back into the soft leather seat of the Huracan. The V10 engine answered with a deep thrum at the press of a button. The brief stop for fuel had been a minor inconvenience on an otherwise perfect day. She was on her way to a private gallery visit, the new collection of a celebrated artist, and she carried $10,000 in cash carefully tucked inside her Hermes bag, the reserve price of a piece she longed for. The gas station, a necessary evil, was already fading from her memory as she eased back onto the street. The car's powerful engine barely whispered as it moved forward. She glanced at her reflection in the rearview mirror, adjusting a loose curl. Her mind was already on the art, the champagne, the conversation ahead. Then the world fractured into strobing flashes of red and blue. Her heart did not leap with fear. It sank with a familiar, weary resignation. She checked the speedometer. She was traveling exactly at the limit. She sighed, the sound a soft puff of exasperation. It was happening again. She, a successful black woman, driving a car that cost more than the average house in this neighborhood, attracted this kind of attention. It was a tax she paid for her success, a constant, exhausting burden on her peace of mind. She pulled over at once. The Lamborghini's massive carbon ceramic brakes brought the car to a silent, effortless stop. She watched in the rearview mirror as Officer Vance Maddox took his time. He did not simply exit the vehicle. He stepped out deliberately, left the door hanging open for a moment, then pushed himself upright. A man of practiced, intentional intimidation. He adjusted his belt, one hand resting casually on the butt of his 9mm Glock, a gesture that was anything but casual. He walked toward her car, boots crunching on the gravel of the shoulder with a slow, arrogant gait. I was a man who savored his power, who enjoyed the moment. Leora lowered the window just enough to speak. The cold air from the climate control formed a barrier against the oppressive heat, and the man who brought it with him. Maddox's shadow fell over her, blocking the sun. He leaned in, his face a mask of feigned courtesy that never reached his cold, pale eyes. "Good afternoon, ma'am," he said in a low voice. He glanced inside the car, scanning the luxurious interior, then at her, lingering a moment too long on her chest before meeting her eyes. "License and registration, please." His tone was flat, bored, but beneath it lay something else, a predatory interest. Leora retrieved the documents from the glove box without a word. Her movements were calm, precise. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her nervous. She passed them through the window. He took them, his fingers brushing hers in a slight, greasy contact that made her want to pull her hand away. He glanced at her license. "Leora Hale," he said, deliberately mispronouncing her first name. "Interesting name." He looked from the photo to her face. "That's a big car for a little lady like you," he added, with a mocking smile. "Must have a very generous friend." The insinuation was as thick and repulsive as the city's toxic haze. It was a test, a probe to see if she would get angry, grow defensive, give him an excuse to escalate. Leora refused the bait. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked in a perfectly serene voice, like a stream of cold water over his burning condescension. "You were driving erratically back there," he lied softly, gesturing vaguely behind him. Weaving out of your lane. Looked like you were in a real hurry to get somewhere. It was a complete fabrication, a scripted line he had used hundreds of times. The stop was not about a traffic violation. It was about creating an opportunity. It was about the slow, methodical process of establishing dominance, of making his target feel trapped, helpless, and willing to do or pay whatever it took to make the situation disappear. He had set the stage. Now it was time to see how his protagonist would perform. Maddox held her license and registration in one hand, tapping them against his thigh. A rhythmic, irritating sound in the tense silence. He was enjoying this, drawing it out. His eyes swept the interior of the car again, a silent, critical inventory of her wealth. You know, a reckless driving ticket. That's a serious matter, he began with feigned gravity. Mandatory court appearance, points on your license. Your insurance company is going to have a field day with this. He shook his head slowly with an expression of deep concern. It's a real shame. Such a nice, and you'll have this hanging over you. Not to mention, you'll have to get this pretty car out of the impound lot. The word impound was the key. It was the threat, the pressure point. The idea of her six-figure supercar being dragged by a filthy tow truck and locked behind a chain-link fence was meant to instill panic. He was painting her a bureaucratic nightmare, a tangle of inconvenience in which she was now trapped. Lyora listened with an unreadable expression. She recognized the script instantly. It was the classic shakedown, a tired, pathetic performance by a man who saw his badge not as a shield for the public, but as the key to a private cash register. He was not seeking justice. I was seeking compensation. He wanted her to beg, to plead, to ask the magic question. Isn't there something we can do to take care of this right now? She would do none of those things. Her composure was not merely a personality trait. It was a strategy. Her father, the state's attorney general, Lucian Hale, had drilled it into her since adolescence. Never let them see you sweat, he always said. The moment you show fear, they own you. Be polite, be firm, and know the law better than they do. I understand the process, officer, Lyora said, in a voice that remained a model of unsettling calm. If you believe I've committed a violation, please write the citation. I have an excellent attorney, and I'm confident we can resolve this in court. Her response was a slap. It was not the reaction he wanted or expected. He was accustomed to tears, stammered excuses, and panicked negotiations. He was not accustomed to this cold, almost regal dismissal of his power. He had presented her with a catastrophe, and she had answered as if it were a minor scheduling conflict. The mention of an excellent attorney was another blow. It hinted at a world of resources and influence he had not fully considered. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. The easy score was proving not so easy. A lawyer, huh? He scoffed, trying to regain his balance. That's going to cost you a lot more than this ticket. But hey, it's your money. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial murmur. I'm just trying to be nice here, trying to save you a lot of trouble. Sometimes a small contribution to the community can take care of this kind of problem. We can show a little goodwill, and everyone can get on with their day. There it was, the veiled demand wrapped in the sugary language of corruption. Community contribution. Goodwill. He was a common thug, a stick-up artist hiding behind a uniform. Lyora looked at him steadily. Her honey-colored eyes held him without a trace of fear. I appreciate the offer, officer, she said, her tone hard enough to add a new edge of steel. But I don't contribute to communities that operate outside the law. Please write the citation, or let me go. I have somewhere to be. It was a direct challenge. She had not only rejected his offer, she had called him a criminal to his face. She had taken his carefully constructed stage and set it on fire. The prey had just told the hunter that his claws were dull and his teeth mediocre. And for a man like Vance Maddox, a man whose identity rested on a fragile foundation of authority and intimidation, that was an insult that could not go unanswered. The game was over. The jokes were finished. The change in Officer Maddox was palpable. It was a physical transformation, a shift in the very atmosphere around him. The mask of the bored, condescending cop dissolved, and the face beneath was raw, ugly, and contorted with rage. Her calm, her refusal to play the terrified victim he expected, had broken something inside him. She had punctured the fragile balloon of his ego, and the resulting explosion was silent, but violent. His pale blue eyes, once lazy and mocking, were now cold, hard chips of ice. His jaw was clenched. A muscle twitched near his temple. He had offered her a way out, a chance to pay tribute to his power, and she had thrown it back in his face. She had exposed him as what he was, a cheap hustler with a badge, and his humiliation was turning into fury. "Get out of the car," he said. The words were low, guttural, stripped of any pretense of courtesy. It was not a request. It was an order, backed by the barely contained threat of violence. Lyora's heart, which had been beating at a steady, controlled rhythm, now gave a single hard thud against her ribs. This was the tipping point. The situation was escalating beyond the usual harassment into something far more dangerous. He was losing control. Her mind raced, calculating the odds, the possible outcomes. Staying in the car made her a target, trapped behind glass. Getting out exposed her, but it also changed the dynamic. She had to obey, yet she would do it on her own terms. Slowly and deliberately, she put the car in park and unbuckled her seatbelt. She did not rush. She exited with the same measured grace as before, unfolding her long legs and rising to face him. In her heels, she stood several centimeters taller than he did, a fact that seemed to enrage him further. She stood beside her car, the emerald silk of her dress a flash of color against the grimy background, and waited. "I said get out of the car," he repeated, his voice rising, cracking with anger. "You deaf, or do people like you think you're too special to follow orders?" The phrase, "people like you," hung in the air, loaded with unspoken venom. It was the language of a man whose racism was no longer a subtle undercurrent, but an open, raging sewer. He stepped closer, invading her personal space, forcing her to look up at him. The smell of stale sweat and cheap aftershave washed over her. "You think you can come into my city in your ridiculous pimp mobile and talk down to me?" He spat, his face centimeters from hers. "You think your lawyer's going to help you now? Out here, I am the law. I am the judge and the jury. And right now the judge is very, very pissed off." Every word confirmed her worst fears. This was no longer about money. It was about power. It was about his need to reassert dominance, to punish her for her defiance, for her very existence. He needed to see her broken. He needed to see the fear in her eyes. Leora held his gaze, her own face a mask of resolved calm, yet inside a cold dread began to coil in her stomach. The street was deserted. The gas station attendant was hidden inside his small booth. There were no witnesses. She was alone with an armed man, a badge, and a deep, simmering hatred about to overflow. She knew she needed to de-escalate, to find a way to soothe this pathetic, dangerous man's wounded pride. But she had miscalculated. She had assumed he was still acting out of self-interest. She was wrong. He had left rationality behind. I was now operating on pure, poisonous emotion. The mask had not simply slipped. He had torn it off and thrown it to the ground. The air crackled with a tension so dense it felt like a physical weight. Vance Maddox stood centimeters from Leora, his hot, foul breath against her face. His body radiated a palpable aura of threat. He was a cornered animal, and her refusal to cower had left him, in his twisted mind, with only one path forward. An absolutely terrifying escalation. He needed to break her. He needed to see the pride in her eyes shattered and replaced by the terror he felt she deserved. She had disrespected him. She had challenged him, a black woman in a luxury car, and his entire worldview demanded that the natural order be restored through violence. His hand, which had been resting on his hip, moved. The sound was quiet, yet in the suffocating silence, it rang as loud as a gunshot. The metallic click of his holster's retention strap releasing. Leora's eyes flicked to his hand for a fraction of a second, and in that instant, the cold dread in her stomach turned to ice. This was real. This was happening. "You think you're better than me?" he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. "Let's see how high and mighty you are now." With a quick, practiced motion, he drew his Glock. Suddenly, the weapon was between them. A blunt, ugly piece of black polymer and steel. It seemed to suck all the light and air from the space around it. He did not point it at her head. Not yet. He held it low, aimed at the ground, but its presence was a declaration of absolute power. It was the final argument, the ultimate trump card. All her intelligence, her wealth, her serenity, none of it mattered against this. "I give the orders," he growled, his eyes wide and triumphant. He had found the fear he was looking for. He could see it in the subtle widening of her eyes, in the tension of her jaw. He had regained control. "On your knees," he said. The words were flat, devoid of emotion, which made them even more terrifying. It was the point of no return. Leora's mind raced. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to fight, to do anything other than submit to this act of supreme humiliation. But the lessons of her father, the endless drills and conversations about survival in a world that could turn against you in an instant, overrode them. "Your life is the only thing that cannot be replaced," she heard his voice in her head. "Dignity can be recovered. Life cannot." Fighting him would get her killed. Running would get her shot in the back. Obeying was not surrender. It was a tactical decision. It was the only move left on the board that would get her home alive. She breathed carefully, holding back the sob that threatened to escape. She would not give him her tears. She would not give him her screams. Slowly, her body moving with a rigid, unnatural grace, she lowered herself to the ground. The sharp gravel of the shoulder dug into her bare knees through the thin silk of her dress. The humiliation was physical, a scorching wave that flooded her. She was on her knees at the edge of a dirty road, in front of a man who hated her for the color of her skin, the car she drove, and her confidence. He had won this battle. He had reduced her to this. He loomed over her, a monstrous silhouette against the blinding sun, the pistol still in his hand. "That's better," he said with contempt, his voice thick with sadistic satisfaction. "A beauty like you in a car like this, you must be used to kneeling for a man, right? But this time, you won't get a tip. You'll pay a fine." He had stripped her of her power, her freedom of movement, and her dignity. He believed he had taken everything. He was wrong. He had left her with her mind, and in her mind, a plan was already beginning to form, a plan to survive now and a plan to settle accounts later. Kneeling on the sharp gravel with the sun beating down on her head, Leora Hale felt a strange, chilling clarity. The initial surge of terror and humiliation receded, replaced by a focused, icy pragmatism. Vance Maddox had a gun. Hy was unstable. His ego was fragile, shattered, and he was reveling in this moment of absolute power. Her life depended on her next move. He had mentioned a fine. The extortion was back on the table, but the stakes were far higher. He no longer wanted only her money. He wanted her fear, her submission. She had to give him what he wanted, or at least the illusion of it. She had to make him believe he had won so completely that he would take the money and let her go. Her eyes, which had been fixed on his face, now dropped to the ground. It was a calculated display of submission, a gesture designed to soothe his raging ego. "Please," she said, her voice carefully constructed. A whisper with a tremor she did not have to entirely fake. "Please don't hurt me. What do you want?" Her voice, so different from the cold, defiant tone she had used before, was music to his ears. It was the sound of victory. "What do I want?" He chuckled, a low, unpleasant sound. "I want you to learn a little respect, but since you're asking so nicely," he gestured with the barrel of the Glock toward her car. "I'm sure a woman like you doesn't go around without a little shopping money." The condescension had returned, but now it was gloating rather than aggressive. Hunt felt secure in his dominance. This was the opening she needed. "My bag," she said, still looking at the ground. "It's in the car, on the passenger seat. There's money for a painting I was going to buy." She let her voice catch slightly on the word painting, adding another layer to her performance of the wealthy, broken woman. "How much money?" he asked, his voice sharp and greedy. The hook was set. 10,000, she whispered, his breath caught. 10,000. It was perfect. It was exactly what he needed to get the loan shark off his back. It was a life-changing sum for him, and an amount he imagined she would not even miss. The universe had handed it to him. "Get it," he ordered. Slowly, no sudden moves. Leora rose, her knees nearly buckling. She did not look at him. She kept her gaze lower as she walked to the passenger side. With every slow, measured, non-threatening movement, she opened the door. Her hands trembled just enough to be convincing. The Hermes handbag sat on the leather seat. She picked it up. For a moment, she thought of the phone inside, of the single button that would trigger an emergency alert to her father. But it was too risky. He was too close, too volatile. She had to see this through. She opened the bag and withdrew the thick manila envelope filled with crisp, new $100 bills. She turned toward him, holding out the envelope. "Take it," she said. "Please take it and let me go." He snatched the envelope from her hand, eyes wide with wild greed, as he quickly thumbed through the bills. It was all there. A wave of triumphant relief washed over him. He had done it. He had faced down this arrogant, wealthy woman and won. Hy was in control. He had the power. He stuffed the envelope into the pocket of his cargo pants. "Wasn't so hard, was it?" he mocked. "Just a little cooperation." He still held the pistol, but he had lowered it. His attention had shifted from dominance to the money burning in his pocket. He wanted to leave, to celebrate, to feel the sweet relief of his problems being solved. "Get in your car," he ordered, his voice still rough but no longer unhinged. "And get the hell out of my city. If I see you or this car again, you won't be paying a fine. You understand me?" "Yes," she whispered. "I understand." She slid back into the driver's seat without daring to look at him, and closed the door. The engine roared to life. He stepped back with a triumphant, petulant smile and returned to his patrol car. Leora did not wait. She put the car in gear and pulled away, not accelerating wildly, but with a firm, determined urgency. She did not look back. In the rearview mirror, she watched him become a small, insignificant figure, growing smaller until he disappeared. She had paid the price of survival. Now it was time to collect the debt. Leora drove with both hands locked on the wheel, knuckles white. She drove through the dilapidated streets of Vance Maddox's kingdom, past the peeling paint and broken windows, until the landscape began to change. The buildings grew taller, the streets cleaner. She had returned to her world. She parked the Lamborghini in a secluded spot on a multi-level parking structure, a place of cool concrete and shadow, and shut off the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, and in that silence, the carefully constructed barrier of her serenity finally cracked. A dry sob escaped her lips, a harsh, ugly sound torn from the deepest part of her soul. Her body began to tremble, no longer from fear, but from a surge of pure, unadulterated rage. The humiliation, the terror, the dazzling injustice flooded her. She had been violated, not physically, but in a way just as profound. He had put a gun to her head and forced her to her knees on a dirty road. He had taken her money, but what he had truly stolen was her sense of safety, her belief that her success could serve as a shield. She rested her forehead against the cool leather of the steering wheel and allowed herself exactly one measured stretch of time. Time to tremble, to creep by, to feel the full, toxic weight of the trauma. She let the anger consume her, not as a chaotic fire, but as a purifying flame, burning away the last remnants of fear and leaving behind a hard, cold determination as sharp as diamond. When the moment passed, she lifted her head. The tears were gone. Her eyes were clear, and her warm honey irises were now hard and bright as gemstones. The victim was gone. The warrior remained. She reached into her bag with movements that were no longer trembling, but precise and firm. She withdrew her smartphone. Not the latest model, but a custom reinforced device with military-grade encryption. She scrolled through her contacts, past the names of gallery owners, partners, and friends, until she found a single entry at the top of the list. Dad. She pressed the call button. He answered on the first ring. Leora, sweetheart, is everything all right? The voice on the end was warm, familiar, filled with the affection of a loving father. It was the voice of the state's Attorney General, Lucian Hale. I'm fine, Dad, she said, and she was surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. I'm safe, but something happened. The warmth in his voice vanished instantly, replaced by a focused, professional calm. It was the voice that struck fear into the hearts of criminals and corrupt politicians. It was the voice of the most powerful lawman in the state. Tell me, he said. Where are you? I'm in a downtown parking garage. I'm all right, but a short while ago, I was stopped by a municipal police officer. She recounted the entire incident in a low, monotone voice, as if reading an official report. She omitted no detail: the fabricated traffic stop, the condescending remarks, the demand for a bribe, the gun, the order to kneel, the $10,000. She reported the facts without the emotion that still churned in her stomach. A deep, terrifying silence fell on the other end of the line. Lucian Hale listened, and with every word his daughter spoke, the loving father was consumed by the righteous fury of the Attorney General. He was a man who had dedicated his life to the law, to the ideal that justice should be blind, and that the badge was a sacred trust. What he was hearing was the story of how that trust had been completely desecrated. He pointed a gun at you, Lucien said at last, his voice dangerously low, a distant thunder on the horizon. Yes, Dad. And he made you kneel? Yes. And he took the money? Yes. Another, Longer silence. This time, Leora could almost feel the pressure through the phone. The immense, controlled power of her father's anger concentrated into a single sharp point. "Do you know his name, Leora?" he asked, his voice now stripped of emotion, cold and clinical as a surgeon's scalpel. "No," she said, "but I have the license plate of his car and the exact time and place of the stop." "That's all I need," he said. "Stay where you are. Don't move. Don't speak to anyone. I'm activating the Special Investigations Unit. A team will be with you shortly. They're my people. Trust them completely. Do you understand?" "I understand, Dad," she said. "Leora," he said. And for an instant, the father's voice returned, saturated with fierce protective love. "I'm so sorry this happened to you, but I promise you this. The man who did this, his life as he knows it is over. He just declared war on my family, and I am going to level his world." He ended the call. The storm had been unleashed. Within moments of the call ending, a silent, encrypted alert went out from the Attorney General's office. In an anonymous building in the state capitol, 12 floors above the city, the lights came on in a room known simply as the Center. This was the nerve center of the Attorney General's Special Investigations Unit, an elite team of former federal agents, brilliant tech analysts, and forensic accountants who answered directly and exclusively to Lucian Hale. They were his scalpels, his hammers, his ghosts in the machine. They were the unit he deployed when the system failed, when the corruption was too deep for conventional police to handle. They did not merely investigate crimes, they dismantled criminal organizations. And a corrupt police officer was, in the Attorney General's view, a one-man criminal organization. The team leader, a stern, gray-haired man named Harlan Reeves, a former FBI counterterrorism expert, read the Attorney General's initial brief on his tablet. His expression was granite. An armed robbery and assault of the Attorney General's daughter committed by a police officer. This was not a simple case. It was a declaration of war against their own house. "All right, people, listen up." Reeves's voice cut through the quiet hum of the servers. "We have a night code, alpha priority. This is a direct action from the Attorney General." The team, a mix of investigators in sharp suits and tech experts in hoodies and jeans, gathered around the central holographic display table. The target is an unidentified city police officer. The victim is Leora Hale. A collective breath moved through the room. Everyone knew who she was. "I want a complete surveillance package on him effective immediately, physical and digital." Another analyst spoke. "We're on his phone," she said quietly. "GPS shows he's on patrol, heading back to Precinct 15. We're reviewing all his recent calls and messages. Looks like he has a prepaid disposable phone. We're working that too." "And his service record?" Reeves asked. Another investigator answered, scanning a file on his screen. "It's messy. 6 excessive force complaints in the last 5 years, all dismissed. 2 internal affairs investigations for misconduct, both closed for lack of evidence. The man is a walking lawsuit, but it looks like his boss has been protecting him." "Of course he has," Reeves murmured. "All right, we watch him. I want a drone team, an unmarked vehicle detail. Install a pinhole camera at his house. I want to know who he talks to. Voice recognition analysis on his calls. Who is that bookie he owes money to?" Information flowed in torrents, a flood of data that painted a crystal-clear picture of Vance Maddox. They found the encrypted messages from the loan shark. They pulled his bank records, which showed a man living far beyond his means and constantly taking high-interest payday loans. They found his online gambling accounts with a history of thousands of dollars in losses. He was not merely a corrupt cop. He was a desperate man drowning, and today he had tried to use the Attorney General's daughter as a life raft. While this digital dissection was underway, a two-car team of plainclothes SIU agents was dispatched to Leora's location. They were not police. They were discreet professionals who moved with the confidence of people who operated in the shadows. They would secure her, take her statement, and, most importantly, begin the chain of evidence that would form the foundation of the case that would completely destroy Officer Vance Maddox. The machinery of reckoning was now fully in motion. It was silent, invisible, and absolutely relentless. Vance Maddox felt like a new man. He drove his patrol car with one hand on the wheel and the other resting on the thick bulge in his cargo pocket. The envelope of $10,000 was a warm, comforting weight against his thigh, a talisman against the fear that had gnawed at him for weeks. He was invincible. He was a god. He had faced a challenge, a beautiful, arrogant woman who thought herself untouchable, and he had bent her to his will. He had made her kneel. The memory sent a pure, undiluted surge of power through him. It was better than any drug, better than any winning streak at the poker table. He had taken her money, yes, but he had also taken her pride. He had put her in her place, and in doing so, he had reaffirmed his own. He was the law. He was the one who decided who won and who lost on his streets. And today, he had won. His first stop was not the station. He drove to a seedy, smoke-filled bar on the edge of an industrial park, a place where cops, criminals, and the men who lived in the gray area between them came to do business. His bookie, a fat, wheezing man named Silas, sat in a sticky vinyl booth in the back. Maddox slid into the seat across from him with a triumphant smile. "You wanted to see me, Silas," he said in a voice dripping with newly discovered confidence. Silas looked up, his piggy eyes filled with threat. "You got my money, Vance, or are we talking again about your wife's work schedule?" Maddox laughed, a loud, ugly bark. He reached into his pocket and dropped the thick envelope on the table. The sound was a solid, satisfying thud. "Count it," he said. "It's all there." Silas's eyes widened as he opened the envelope and thumbed through the stack of hundreds. A slow, greasy smile spread across his face. "Well, well, look at you, Ricky. Finally hit the lottery." He whistled. "Where does a guy like you get a haul like that?" Maddox leaned back in the booth, chest out. He could not resist the urge to brag. "Let's just say I convinced a very rich and very stupid woman to make a generous donation to the police ball," he said with a wink. She was driving a ridiculous green spaceship, dressed like she was going to the Oscars. Thought she was hot shit. Had to give her a little lesson in humility. She got a lot more cooperative after looking down the barrel of my service weapon. Silas let out a wet, guttural laugh. "That's my boy, Vance. That's how it's done. These rich people live in another world. You've got to remind them who's in charge down here." Maddox felt a surge of pride. This was respect. This was the validation he craved. He was not just a neighborhood cop drowning in debt. He was a player, a man who could get whatever he wanted. He ordered a beer, the first of the day, and basked in the glory of his victory. The $10,000 had vanished, swallowed by the enormous debt, but the sense of power it had given him was priceless. He was untouchable. He left the bar feeling 3 meters tall. The fear of his bookie had been replaced by arrogant confidence. The world was at his feet. He finished his shift by filing a deliberately vague and brief report about a routine traffic stop with a warning. No mention of the green Lamborghini or its driver. He was covering his tracks, but he did it with the careless indifference of a man who believed there would be no consequences. Who was going to complain? To the police? He was the police. The idea that she might have connections, that she might be something more than the isolated, powerless victim he had imagined, never crossed his mind. He saw the world through a lens of rigid hierarchies. There were cops like him, and there was everyone else, and he was at the top. That night, he returned to his modest beige house in a typical suburb. His wife met him at the door, her face marked with worry. "Did you take care of the money?" she asked in a nervous whisper. "Don't worry about that," he said, giving her a condescending pat on the cheek with a smile. "I handled it. Everything's under control." He was the provider, the protector, the man in charge. His delusion was total, a fortress of arrogance, built on foundations of prejudice and ignorance. He was celebrating victory in a war he did not even know had been declared, completely unaware that his fortress was already surrounded, its walls being dismantled silently, brick by digital brick. While Vance Maddox reveled in his apparent brilliance, a silent, methodical war was being waged against him from the SIU command center. In an unmarked van, parked 3 blocks from the bar, where Maddox had met his bookie, 2 agents monitored a live feed from a high-powered parabolic microphone aimed at the rear entrance of the bar. Every word of Maddox's boastful confession to Silas was recorded with crystal clarity. The analyst in the van, a young woman with headphones pressed to her ears, transcribed the conversation in real time, fingers flying over the keyboard. Target stated, "She got a lot more cooperative after looking down the barrel of my service weapon." The line was highlighted in red. It was a direct admission of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. The case against him, already solid, was becoming an ironclad foundation. Harlan Reeves stood in the center, watching the data stream in. The information painted the portrait of a man corrupted to the marrow. "All right," Reeves said in a low, controlled voice that carried authority. "We have his confession to the assault. We have the financial motive. Let's build the conspiracy case." The surveillance on Maddox was now comprehensive. A silent, dragonfly-shaped drone hovered over his suburban house, its thermal camera mapping the heat signatures inside. They knew which room he was in. They knew he was watching television with his wife. The digital team had effortlessly breached his home Wi-Fi. Every email he sent, every website he visited was mirrored on their servers. They activated the microphone on his laptop, turning his own device into a listening post. His home, his sanctuary, was now a glass cage. Hunting out a call, not from his prepaid phone, but from his regular cell, feeling secure in the privacy of his living room. It was to another officer, his friend and former partner, a man named Brody. The audio fed into the speakers at the center. "Brody, you won't believe the day I had." Maddox's voice rang out, full of drunken bravado. "I scored, man. Big time." "Oh yeah?" Brody's voice answered, intrigued. "How much?" "10 grand. I stopped this little hot number in a Lamborghini. The black girl thought she didn't stink. Had to educate her. She was practically throwing money at me by the time I was done with her." "Jesus, Vance, you got some balls," Brody said with a note of nervous admiration. "You worried she'll file a complaint?" Maddox let out a mocking laugh. "A complaint with who? Chief Briggs? He'll bury it so deep it'll come out in China. Besides, who are they gonna believe? Some ghetto princess or a 15-year veteran? She knows her place. I guarantee we won't hear from her again." In the center, Reeves looked at his team. "He's admitting a conspiracy with his chief," Reeves stated flatly. "And we have a name, Chief Briggs. Open a file on him too. Let's see how deep this rot goes." The invisible eyes and ears of the state were everywhere. They documented his arrogance, his racism, his casual corruption. Every boast was a thread, and they were weaving those threads into a net that was closing slowly and silently around him. He believed himself untouchable, protected by his badge and the infamous blue wall of silence. He had no idea that the walls he trusted were about to collapse around him, brought down by a force so incomprehensible he could not even foresee it. The silence surrounding Leora Hale was not the silence of fear he imagined. It was the patient, methodical silence of a hunter preparing a trap, waiting for the prey to step into it. And Vance Maddox, blinded by his own arrogance, walked forward with a confident, idiotic smile. The following morning, as planned, the first official move was made through the most conventional channels. It was a crucial step in the legal chess game Lucian Hale was playing. Before deploying the full, overwhelming force of the state against Precinct 15, he had to give them the opportunity to police themselves. He had to document their inevitable failure. A high-ranking prosecutor from the Attorney General's Public Integrity Section placed a formal call to the office of Police Chief Harlan Briggs. The call was polite, professional, and deliberately understated. The prosecutor informed the chief that his office had received an informal citizen complaint about an interaction with one of his officers, Sergeant Vance Maddox, during a traffic stop the previous day. He asked the chief to look into the matter and provide a report of his findings. It was a test, a bait thrown at the feet of the blue wall of silence. Chief Harlan Briggs, a man in his 50s, with a face like a closed fist and a belly that spoke of a long, comfortable career behind a desk, took the call in his office. He listened, frowning. The Attorney General's people. He hated them. A bunch of pretentious lawyers who had never done real police work, always looking down on the real cops, and a complaint against Vance Maddox. He knew Maddox. Maddox was a hothead, an old-school cop who sometimes colored outside the lines, but he was one of his own. An informal complaint, Briggs growled into the phone. From who? The citizen prefers to remain anonymous at this time, the prosecutor replied smoothly. Of course, anonymous. Briggs scoffed. Look, I'll talk to my sergeant, but I'll tell you right now. Sergeant Maddox is a 15-year veteran with a decorated record. 9 times out of 10, these complaints come from some lowlife with an axe to grind because they got a ticket. I'll handle it. He hung up. I'll handle it. A clear promise to bury the matter. His next call was to Vance Maddox. Vance, it's the chief. What the hell did you do yesterday? Maddox's heart skipped, but his arrogance quickly drowned the flicker of fear. So she had complained after all. He could not believe her nerve. It was nothing, Chief, he said, with a mixture of annoyance and self-confidence. I stopped a rich girl with an attitude problem, gave her a warning and let her go. She's probably just mad because a white cop had the nerve to stop her precious Lamborghini. Chief Briggs relaxed. It was a story he understood and accepted. The AG's office is sniffing around, he said. Some prosecutor calling about an anonymous complaint. The AG's office? Maddox asked, a little surprised. She must have some lawyer friend. Doesn't matter, Briggs said firmly. I'm not going to let those bastards leave one of my men hanging out to dry over a traffic stop. Here's what you're going to do. Write a supplemental report. You'll say the driver was verbally abusive, uncooperative, and threatened you. You'll say you suspected she was under the influence, but she took off at high speed before you could administer a test. We're going to get out in front of this. We're going to make her the aggressor. Understood? Understood, Chief, Maddox said with a smile on his face. This was perfect. Not only would they weather the storm, they would turn it around. He felt a renewed sense of security. The blue wall was holding strong. He was protected. He spent the next hour inventing the report, layering on lies and embellishments, painting Leora as a deranged, aggressive harpy. He filed it electronically before lunch. Chief Briggs signed off on it, adding a note of praise for Maddox's restraint in the face of extreme provocation. They had built their wall of lies, convinced it would be impenetrable. They had no idea that their entire conversation had been recorded. They did not know that the SIU already possessed the GPS data from Maddox's patrol car, proving he had gone to his betting bar immediately after the stop, not in pursuit of a fleeing suspect. They did not know that every lie they wrote was being checked against a mountain of irrefutable evidence. They believed they were building a fortress. In reality, they were only digging their own graves a little deeper. They had taken the bait. The trap had sprung. The institutional failure had been documented and recorded. Subtlety was over. Night settled over the quiet suburban streets where Vance Maddox lived. A dense mantle of damp darkness. It was a night like any other. He ate dinner with his wife, watched a baseball game on television, and drank a few too many beers. Feeling secure and triumphant, he had faced a threat and, with the help of his chief, had crushed it. He was safe. He was untouchable. He went to bed and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, the peaceful sleep of a man completely convinced of his own power and completely unaware of the storm about to break directly over him. A few kilometers away, in an anonymous industrial park, the final preparations were underway inside a large, unmarked warehouse that served as the SIU's tactical base. The atmosphere was cold, silent, and intensely focused. 2 black armored tactical vans sat with engines idling softly. A team of 12 SIU tactical officers in matty black body armor, helmets, and night vision goggles performed final equipment checks. They were not police. They were former Special Forces operators, the best of the best, recruited by Lucian Hale for their discipline, precision, and absolute loyalty. There was no chatter, no bravado, only the soft click of magazines seating and the quiet hum of sophisticated communications gear. Harlan Reeves stood in front of them with a tablet displaying a 3-dimensional floor plan of Maddox's house. "All right, listen up," he said in a low, gravelly voice. "The target is Vance Maddox. He is a sworn police officer, so he is considered armed and dangerous. His wife is also in the residence. We have thermal confirmation of their location in the master bedroom. Our objective is total surprise and overwhelming force. We breach, secure, control. This has to be clean, fast, and by the book. The Attorney General wants this done with surgical precision. Any questions?" There were none. They knew the house layout by heart. They knew which floorboards creaked. They had studied Maddox's service record and knew he was right-handed and kept a personal weapon in his nightstand. At a predetermined hour, they boarded the vans. The heavy doors closed with a final, definitive thud. The convoy left the industrial park and moved through the pre-dawn darkness like a ghost. Drivers used night vision to navigate the sleeping streets. As they turned onto the final street leading to Maddox's cul-de-sac, the world seemed to hold its breath. The sky was beginning to shift from black to a deep, bruised purple. The air was cool and still. In the Attorney General's command center, Lucian Hale watched a multi-screen display showing live feeds from the drone and the tactical team's helmet cameras. He sat alone in the darkness with an untouched cup of coffee beside him, his face illuminated by the cold blue light of the screens. This was the part he hated, the moment when the controlled legal process became physical violence. But it was necessary violence. A cancer had to be excised, and the surgery had to be swift and decisive. He looked at a framed photograph on his desk. It was of Leora smiling on her graduation day. He clenched his jaw. This was for her. This was for every other person who had been intimidated, extorted, and terrorized by men like Maddox, but who did not have a father capable of unleashing the wrath of the state. The vans positioned themselves silently at both ends of the street, cutting off any escape. Dark figures disembarked, moving with fluid, predatory grace across the well-kept lawns. The stillness of the suburban morning was about to be irrevocably broken. The hammer of justice was raised, ready to fall. In the silent pre-dawn gloom of Vance Maddox's master bedroom, the digital clock on the nightstand advanced. He and his wife continued to sleep, wrapped in the blissful ignorance that had defined his career. In that precise instant the world as he knew it ceased to exist. The first sound was not a knock, but a deafening explosion. A controlled breaching charge, placed on the front door lock, blew the mechanism inward with a concussive crack that shook the entire house. The front door, symbol of his suburban security, flew open, slamming into the interior wall and splintering the frame. Simultaneously, the large living room picture window disintegrated into a million glittering fragments as a flashbang grenade arced through the air and detonated inside. The resulting explosion of light and sound was blinding, deafening, and completely disorienting. "State Police! Search warrant! Get down!" The shouts were a synchronized, terrifying roar coming from a dozen different throats, amplified and inhuman. Maddox was jolted from a deep sleep into a state of pure primal terror. His heart hammered against his ribs. His first thought, the conditioned reflex of a man who saw threats everywhere, was that Silas's men had come to kill him. He sat up in bed, fumbling in the darkness for the .38 revolver he kept in the nightstand drawer, a secret from both his wife and his department. He never reached it. Before his fingers could even touch the cold steel of the weapon, the bedroom door exploded inward, ripped from its hinges by a battering ram. The threshold filled with a terrifying silhouette, a massive figure in full tactical gear, helmet and night vision goggles, glowing with an unsettling predatory green. A brilliant tactical light mounted on the rifle pinned Maddox against the wall, blinding him. "Hands! Show me your hands now!" the agent shouted. Maddox froze, hands half raised, unable to process the speed and violence of the intrusion. This was not the mob. This was military. Across the bed, his wife was screaming, a high, hysterical shriek of pure panic. She pulled the sheets up to her chin, shrinking against the headboard as two more agents flooded the room, weapons trained on her. "On the floor, face down," an agent ordered Maddox. A heavy boot kicked the backs of his knees, and he collapsed onto the plush carpet. In seconds, his hands were secured behind his back, the cold, tight bite of plastic flex cuffs digging into his wrists. "Who are you? What is this?" he stammered, his face pressed to the floor, the smell of his own fear filling his nose. "Attorney General's office," the agent growled in his ear. "You have the right to remain silent. I strongly recommend you use it." Downstairs the house was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. The team moved with the fluidity and brutal efficiency of a well-oiled machine, clearing every room. The entire house, Maddox's castle, was secured and placed under state control in less than 90 seconds. Outside, the cul-de-sac had erupted. Lights came on in every house. Sleepy, confused neighbors peered through their blinds, pale with shock. They saw the armored vans, the heavily armed men in black, the shattered facade of Maddox's house. It looked like a scene from a war movie. Then they saw Vance Maddox, dressed only in his underwear, being unceremoniously dragged to the front door. The cocky, confident cop they knew had vanished, replaced by a terrified, confused man. His face was a mask of disbelief and growing horror. As he was pushed toward an unmarked car, he glimpsed the faces of his neighbors in the windows, staring at him with wide, astonished eyes. The humiliation was a physical blow. It was not merely an arrest. It was a public stripping of his power and his identity. It was in that moment, as the car door slammed shut and plunged him into darkness, that a terrifying thought cut through his confusion. The girl. The Lamborghini. It had to be her. But how? How could a routine shakedown, a simple score, have led to this? The hammer had fallen, and his world had shattered. The cold, sterile environment of an SIU interrogation room is designed to eliminate every vestige of power and comfort. There are no windows. The walls are a dull gray that absorbs sound. The furniture consists of a single heavy steel table bolted to the floor and 3 hard plastic chairs. It is a sensory isolation chamber where the only thing that matters is the truth. Vance Maddox sat alone in this gray box for what felt like an eternity. The adrenaline of the raid had long since faded, replaced by a nauseating mixture of fear and absolute confusion. They had taken his clothes and given him a paper jumpsuit. The last remnants of his authority were gone. He was no longer Officer Maddox, just a prisoner in a gray room. He kept replaying the events in his head, the woman in the green dress, the Lamborghini. It made no sense. A full tactical raid by the Attorney General's office. For what? An armed robbery. It was insane. Finally, the door opened. 2 men entered. The first was Harlan Reeves. His face was a grim, unreadable mask. The second was an elegant, impeccably dressed man in a dark suit. The lead prosecutor from the Public Integrity Section. They sat across from Maddox. They did not speak. They simply looked at him. Their silence was more intimidating than any shout. Maddox, trying to gather the last scraps of his police bravado, decided to speak first. "I don't know what this is about," he blustered. "I'm a cop. I have rights. I want my union rep and a lawyer." Reeves smiled, a cold, humorless expression. "Your union rep isn't coming, Vance," he said in a quiet, familiar voice. "And your chief has been relieved of duty, pending his own investigation. But you will get a lawyer. Before that happens, we thought you might want to see what we have." The prosecutor placed a laptop on the table and turned it toward Maddox. He hit play. The screen lit up with clear audio waveforms. Maddox's own voice filled the silent room, thin but unmistakable. "She got a lot more cooperative after looking down the barrel of my service weapon." It was his conversation with Silas. Maddox went pale. They had recorded him in the bar. The prosecutor stopped the recording. "Is that you, Officer Maddox? Confessing to aggravated assault?" Maddox did not answer. He stared at the laptop as if it were a snake. The prosecutor pressed another button. This time it was Maddox's voice talking to his friend Brody. "I stopped a good-looking girl in a Lamborghini, a black girl. Thought she didn't stink. Had to educate her." "That sounds like a hate crime enhancement to me," the prosecutor commented calmly. He played another clip, this one of the call with Chief Briggs. "You'll say the driver was abusive and uncooperative. We'll make her the aggressor. And that," the prosecutor said, "is conspiracy to file a false police report and obstruction of justice. We have you cold, officer. We have your finances. We know about the gambling debts. We know everything." Maddox was crumbling. The bravado, the arrogance, everything dissolved, leaving behind a terrified, cornered man. "It was just a shakedown," he stammered. "It got out of hand. She was just some girl." Reeves leaned forward, his gaze fixed on Maddox. "That's where you're wrong, Vance," he said, lowering his voice to a low, intense whisper. She wasn't just some girl. He slid a photograph across the table. It was a candid shot of Leora Hale laughing at a charity event, her arm linked with a handsome, powerful-looking man in a tuxedo. "Do you know who this is, Vance?" Reeves asked. Maddox looked at the photo and recognized the man instantly. Every cop in the state, every criminal knew who that man was. "That's Attorney General Lucian Hale," Maddox whispered, his voice breaking. "Correct," Reeves said. "And the woman whose arm he's around, the woman you put a gun on, the woman you forced to her knees on the side of the road, that is his daughter." The final piece of the puzzle locked into place, and the catastrophic magnitude of his stupidity hit Vance Maddox with the force of a physical blow. The room spun. He could not breathe. He had not merely shaken down some rich girl. He had not merely tangled with a lawyer. He had committed armed robbery against the daughter of the most powerful law enforcement official in the entire state. He covered his face with his hands and let out a guttural moan. It was over. Everything was over. There would be no union rep, no friendly chief to fix this. He had not merely stepped on a landmine, he had detonated a nuclear bomb on his own life. The unraveling was complete. All that remained was to count the years. The hours following Maddox's interrogation were a slow, methodical dismantling of his life. While he sat in a cell contemplating the smoking crater where his existence had once stood, the full coordinated power of the state was brought to bear not only on his freedom, but on every aspect of his life. This was not merely punishment. This was eradication. Lucian Hale was making an example of Vance Maddox, a warning so profound it would resonate through every precinct in the state for a generation. An independent team from the Attorney General's Financial Crimes Unit, armed with a judicial warrant signed even before the raid began, hit Maddox's bank. His accounts, checking, savings, and his pension fund were frozen instantly. All his assets were locked, pending a complete forensic audit. The house they were about to discover was mortgaged to the hilt. The comfortable suburban life he had built on the foundation of petty corruption vanished at the stroke of a key. Simultaneously, a special prosecutor presented the preliminary evidence to an emergency grand jury. The case was overwhelming, a lock built on a mountain of irrefutable video, audio, and financial evidence. The indictment was returned before midday. The charges were devastating. Armed robbery under color of law, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, extortion, filing a false police report, conspiracy to obstruct justice. And, because of the racial insults he had used in his recorded conversations, a federal hate crime enhancement that the Attorney General's office would pursue alongside the state charges. Chief Harlan Briggs was charged with conspiracy and obstruction, and his career ended in deep disgrace. Silas the bookie was arrested for illegal gambling and money laundering, and immediately agreed to testify against Maddox in exchange for a lighter sentence. The blue wall had collapsed, but the criminal charges were only one front in this war. The second front was civil, and it was designed to be equally ruinous. Late in the day, Maddox's court-appointed attorney, a young, overwhelmed public defender, was ushered into a conference room at the Attorney General's office. Waiting for him were the lead special prosecutor and a woman he did not recognize. An elegant, impeccably dressed woman who was a senior partner at the most prestigious civil rights firm in the country. She represented Leora Hale. "Your client is facing a minimum of 18 to 25 years in a state penitentiary," the prosecutor began, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "The evidence is overwhelming. We will not be offering a plea deal." Then the civil attorney spoke. "In addition to the criminal charges," she said in a serene, precise voice. My client, Ms. Hale, has filed a civil lawsuit against Mr. Maddox and the city. We are suing for assault, battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of her civil rights under the 4th and 14th Amendments. She slid a thick legal document across the table. We are seeking compensatory damages, she continued, for the emotional trauma of the racially motivated armed assault, and for punitive damages to punish the defendant for his malicious and deliberate conduct, and to punish the city for its deliberate indifference in failing to train and properly supervise its officers, as demonstrated by Mr. Maddox's long and documented history of misconduct. The young attorney flipped through the pages, searching for the figure. He stopped. Jaw slack. You're seeking millions of dollars? He asked in a tone of disbelief. That is provisional, the attorney replied without blinking. We expect the jury to award a considerably larger amount. We will take his house, his pension, and garnish any wages he earns for the rest of his life. And we will force the city to implement court-ordered radical reforms in its police department. This is not only about money. This is about changing the system that created Vance Maddox. The public defender sat in stunned silence. This was a scorched earth legal strategy. Vance Maddox was not only going to prison, he was going to be erased. He would leave his cell a middle-aged man with only the clothes on his back and a debt he could never repay. He was about to learn that the price of his hatred was everything. The trial of the people versus Vance Maddox was brief and brutal. In the sterile mahogany confines of the state courtroom, the tyrant of Precinct 15 looked small, diminished, and utterly pathetic in his ill-fitting suit. The case captured media attention, a lurid story of police corruption, racial discrimination, and a powerful family's pursuit of justice. The courtroom filled daily with reporters, activists, and curious citizens. The prosecution, led by the state's most relentless deputy attorney general, laid out its case with the cold, methodical precision of a surgeon. They needed no inflammatory rhetoric. The evidence spoke for itself, and it screamed. The first exhibit was the audio. Jurors wearing headphones listened to Vance Maddox's own voice convict him. They heard him brag about putting a gun to Leora's head. They heard him mock her with racial insults. They heard him conspire with his chief to invent a cover story. The recording silenced the entire room, a chilling testimony to the defendant's character. Next came the testimony of Silas the bookie, who, sweating under the lights, detailed Maddox's desperation for money and his boastful confession. Then former Chief Briggs, who, in a deal to save himself from a long sentence, took the stand and admitted under oath that he had deliberately conspired with Maddox to bury the complaint and file a false report. His testimony tore down the wall of silence and exposed the informal corruption that had enabled Maddox's behavior for years. But the centerpiece of the trial was Leora Hale. When she took the stand, silence fell over the courtroom. She was the living embodiment of grace and dignity, dressed in a simple yet elegant navy suit. She recounted the facts with the same unshakable calm she had displayed from the beginning. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She simply stated the facts of her terrible experience. The defense attorney, who knew he was fighting a losing battle, attempted to trip her up on cross-examination. "Ms. Hale," he began, "you had $10,000 in cash in your car. Doesn't that seem a little unusual? Doesn't it suggest you might have been involved in illicit activity?" The question was a desperate, slimy attempt to blame the victim. The prosecutor objected, but Leora answered before the judge could rule. She looked directly at the jury and spoke in a clear, firm voice. "I am co-founder of a non-profit organization that provides art education to underserved children," she said. That afternoon, I was on my way to a charity art auction to purchase a work for our annual fundraiser. The $10,000 was the deposit. My illicit activity is helping children. Officer Maddox's illicit activity was robbing me at gunpoint because he has a gambling problem. The defense attorney asked no further questions. The defense rested without calling a single witness. Putting Vance Maddox on the stand would have been an act of professional suicide. After 2 short days, the prosecution rested. The jury was sent to deliberate. They returned in 45 minutes. The court clerk received the verdict from the foreman. In the case of the People versus Richard Maddox on the charge of armed robbery, how do you find? The foreman cleared his throat and looked directly at Maddox. Guilty. A strangled sob escaped Maddox's wife in the gallery. On the charge of aggravated assault, the clerk continued in a monotone, fatalistic voice. How do you find? Guilty. The litany continued. A drumbeat of conviction. Guilty, guilty, guilty on all counts. With each pronouncement, Vance Maddox seemed to shrink further into his chair, his face pale and sweating, a mask of disbelief. The judge, a formidable man known for his severity, thanked the jury and then turned his steely gaze on the defendant for sentencing. Mr. Maddox, the judge began, in a voice that cut like a blade, you were given a badge, a gun, and the trust of this community. You betrayed that trust in the most despicable way possible. You used your power not to protect, but to prey upon the innocent. You are a disgrace to the uniform you once wore. For your crimes, I sentence you to 18 years in state prison. 18 years. A murmur of astonishment ran through the courtroom. As the federal marshals led the weeping, shattered man from the room, beginning his new life as a convicted felon, Leora Hale stood. She had witnessed the entire process without the slightest display of emotion. She did not smile in triumph. She did not appear relieved. She simply looked resolved. She had not sought vengeance. She had sought justice, and justice, in its slow, exhausting, yet ultimately inexorable way, had been delivered. A year has passed. The city's relentless sun still beats down, yet something in the air feels different, cleaner. Precinct 15 is almost unrecognizable. Under the terms of the massive civil settlement that cost the city a record $100 million and forced comprehensive reform, it is now led by a new chief, a reformer brought in from outside. The Department of Justice has implemented a consent decree requiring new training, a new use of force policy, and a robust early warning system to identify problem officers like Vance Maddox before they can destroy lives. The blue wall has not merely cracked, it has been broken. The change is slow, painful, but real. The green Lamborghini is gone, sold. Leora found it too ostentatious, a relic of a life before the incident. She now drives a more discreet Tesla. The $10 million she won was not spent on herself. The day the check cleared, she founded a new foundation, the Hale Initiative for Police Reform and Community Trust. It funds legal assistance for victims of police misconduct, supports community oversight boards, and provides scholarships to minority students studying law. She turned her trauma into a tool for change. She sits now in her father's office as the setting sun casts long shadows across the skyline. Lucian Hale looks older than he did a year ago. The weight of the fight has carved new lines into his face. Yet his eyes are filled with a deep, enduring pride as he looks at his daughter. I received a letter from the warden of the state penitentiary today, he says quietly, sliding a paper across his polished desk. Leora looks at it. It is a formal notification. Vance Maddox had been attacked in the prison yard. A former gang member he had once arrested recognized him. His injuries were serious. He would survive, but he would be permanently disfigured. Leora reads the words with an impassive expression. She feels nothing, neither joy nor pity. Only a vast, silent emptiness where the anger once lived. "He made his choices, Dad," she says softly. "He built his own cage long before they put bars around him. A cage of hatred, of greed, of ignorance." "I know," Lucienne says, taking her hand. "But what you did, what you endured, mattered, Leora. It sent a message that resonated far beyond one corrupt officer. Your case became a national model for prosecuting police misconduct. You forced a city to confront the rot in its own foundations. You didn't just win a trial. You started a quiet, dignified revolution of your own." He looks at her, his love for her a palpable force in the room. "You took a blow, and in doing so, you exposed a disease that so many people wanted to pretend did not exist. You bled to prove the disease was real." Leora looks out the window at the city stretching below. She thinks of the fear, the humiliation of that day. The memory is no longer an open wound, but a faded scar. The reminder of a battle fought and won. She has learned that true strength does not reside in the power to return the blow, but in the discipline to withstand it. It is the serene, unyielding dignity that refuses to be diminished. It is the quiet determination that uses the machinery of justice to tear down the fortresses of hatred. In the face of intolerance, the most powerful response is not to sink to its level, but to rise so far above it that its ugliness is exposed for all the world to see. And so our story ends. A new day has arrived, not only for Leora, but for the entire city she helped to change. What do you think of the sentence? Were 18 years a fair reflection of Vance Maddox's crimes? And what does it take to truly reform a system that protects men like him for so long? Share your thoughts in the comments. We value your perspective. If this story of poetic justice and unyielding dignity moved you, show your support by clicking the like button and subscribing to the channel for more important stories.